Right then, exciting new project, a new collaboration. One of the benefits of me now working outside of sort of a formal employment structure, I suppose, is being able to reconnect with people. And the good news is that I've been able to reconnect with a massive influence on my career, life, parenting, relationships, coaching. So this is a new series, I suppose, that Mark and I are embarking on, which we have loosely entitled, but maybe no, we haven't loosely. We're going to stick with it, which is "It Depends or Does It?" where we're going to unpick many of the areas sort of underpinning performance, coaching, coach development, people development, things like management, all those sorts of things. But reinvestigating some of the dynamics and bringing to life some of the dynamics around working using the PDS framework, and also just how we can then graft that on from a practical perspective and its applications. Anyway, Mark, welcome, and I'm excited.
We could say 20 plus years in the making, couldn't we, really, in the first met up in golf those decades ago.
Yeah, we could. It's the collaboration that has been meant to be but has never actually materialized. Yeah. Right, so we've got a number of things to talk about, but I guess just a starting point, I suppose, maybe if I just say to you, like, where the sort of genesis of this idea has come from, because it is a little bit, not entirely your brainchild, but it's certainly something that kind of you've conceived of, and then we can then sort of do that sort of intro, and then we can lead into sort of our subject matter for the day.
Yes, so in essence, obviously, you and I have known each other for decades now, from the golf and through the journey of your different roles. The challenge has always been is you've been employed by an organization, and with that comes responsibility and certain filters, and also time and commitment. So when I found out you'd left to go freelance, I just thought, well, this is a great opportunity. I've been on your podcast, I think, equaling amount of times, unless someone's trumped me now. But the challenge with the podcasts are it's a one-off, and obviously you have many different guests. So I thought, now we're in that position. We've got so much experience of challenges, but also solutions in business and the sport world, is to have, and I know we said we'll start off fortnightly, then we can see where we go, something that links, something that syncs, something we can have some fundamental headings to guide us through, to allow us to discuss things in the news, discuss things that through your own journey, Stuart, which we'll talk about in the members area, which we're going to, but also some real tangible tools for performance coaches, athletes, managers, performance directors, business, but also then for the community coach, business manager, organizer. So each couple of weeks, we've got something that connects to the last. It's not just a one-off, and also having an opportunity for people to listen to this, comment and ask questions, and then the following fortnight, actually, we can answer those key questions and potentially shuffle the content to have that as discussion for the next 2 weeks, and also linked with elements in the news. So for me, I thought it was a great opportunity to have a flow. And the whole point of all the passion that I have in people development, and I know with yourself, is not a one-off hit. It's what can we do where someone can go somewhere and say, when I listen to that, I'm either going to come away with questions I can research, come out with some strategies that I can commit to and explore, or actually just connect me back to the real world, connect me back to actually somebody gets it. Somebody is living my nightmare or living my dream, which we know within management and coaching, we get a mix of those each week.
Yeah, and I think from my perspective, it's an opportunity, I think, to revisit some of the areas, and I guess selfishly, to a certain extent, I guess I'm playing the role of learner in some respects, because as much as I've been a student and disciple of much of, you know, your approach, teaching, etc., and applied it, one of the things that I'm aware of is that I guess I've sort of never really been able to fully kind of integrate. So we've often joked in the past that, I'm, if I had a karate belt, a PDS karate belt, where would I be? You know, am I a yellow belt or a brown belt or wherever it is? And I guess this is a journey for me to sort of finally, I guess, try and achieve my black belt by revisiting to a certain extent sort of many of the principles, most of which I may have forgotten because I've sort of dipped in and out. So this is a deep dive for me. And so I'm going to be asking many of the kind of, I guess, the stupid questions and revisiting some of those things, but equally trying as well to maybe graft those on to sort of different contexts that I operate within and sort of talk about what application might be in some of these different contexts. And we do intend, as much as we'll be talking about the sports context, we'll also be talking about a business context. We'll be talking about maybe educational environments. We'll be talking about, kind of adult to adult learning scenarios and all of those different dimensions as well. So, because obviously much of that is stuff I do on a day-to-day basis. So it's probably worth just mentioning that I guess I'm a bit of a guinea pig on the journey as far as this is concerned.
And that's linking into one of the elements we're going to do is obviously the members area, which is my 150 plus hours of resources now, you've actually started to go through the full journey starting in tutorial 1. So each of the fortnights we're going to actually, and that's when people may see that having the challenge it mark, is to actually go through and say, okay, what have you learned there? What are you doing with what you've learned? And actually share your challenges and difficulties of applying new skill. Thinking in a different way when everything is pulling you back to your old way. So I think that's going to be really useful as a step journey. Okay, what have you done with what you've learned? And where are the obstacles and, what's resonated with you? I think that can help connect a lot of people. But as you say, apart from this first one, which obviously we're explaining it, we can really get stuck in straight away. What is it we're talking about this session? What's tangible? Where are the real world challenges? And I think we'll sync quite well, because in general, if we looked at it, okay, what's the big difference between you and I is you're in the big picture philosophy, design, development pathway, so many decades experience within that at the high level. Whereas I've been, although obviously I connect with all of that, a lot of my work is on the shop floor with the performance director, with the head coach, with the senior boss, dealing with the day-to-day challenges of implementing change within an organization. So I think coming together, you can share that big picture, we can look at the tangibles, and then I can really come into, well, here's a common challenge, but here's some strategies and solutions. Or actually, sometimes it isn't a one-off answer. Sometimes it's, look, you got to walk through the mud to come out the other end. It is not going to look nice for maybe months before you get to the outcomes you're looking for.
Yeah, and that also reminded me of something as well, which is that we're very much working in the open here, and this is an exploration. The other dimension to this as well is one of the things that we've talked about doing a little bit is, yes, mapping onto different contexts and environments, but also my journey with PDS has been one where, it's been a companion to me, very much like if you think of the outrigger on an outrigger canoe, it's the sort of thing that keeps the stability. But at the same time, where the directions that I've been paddling in have taken me in different directions. So, of course, one of the areas that I've become extremely I've got very focused on and just done a lot of personal discovery and have been utilizing in application is this area of ecological dynamics and sort of the impact of that from the perspective of developing skill, learning and development and all those sorts of areas. And I suppose this is partly going to be an exploration of where we can see where the kind of the interfaces and the overlap is. I actually think there is lots, and I actually think that PDS offers a really strong foundation. It was probably one of the things that helped me have a jumping off point into the world of ecological dynamics, because it meant I reconceptualized learning, I reconceptualized human performance and all those sorts of things, and it was probably a real grounding in placing humans at the center of the learning experience, or the learner at the center of the experience, whether that's coach, athlete, or whoever, which then made it very easy for me to sort of graft onto ideas around things like ecological dynamics, which is again very, very much a sort of human-centered, environment-centered thing. So there's an intention to try and sort of map those two things together. The final thing I'd say as well, format-wise, obviously we're recording this one and probably the first few just to get used to new platforms and different ways of doing things. But the platform we're using has a feature that will enable us to do some stuff live. So it may be that periodically down the track we do these as live streams, as a bit of a kind of lunch and learn type of thing, because we intend to try and record at the same time each week, roughly lunchtime, which will enable then people to interact. So after they've heard 2 or 3 of the sessions, it may be that questions emerge, and then they can kind of join us and be part of the conversation, from the live stream perspective, which would be going out by various different social channels.
And that links back to the title, really, doesn't it? Which was a bit of a cheeky one, but kind of resonated in a humorous way. Is from my side, I think, and this is where we can be raw here because we're not employed by anybody but ourselves. Is I think there's, and I know we've had discussions about it, and I've had discussions from people that almost have become other sides, are you them or are you us kind of thing, as opposed to, no, we're all together. It's just breaking down the barriers, and I think of understanding. So a success for me during this as well would be anything, whether it's ecological dynamics or any coaching styles, irrelevant philosophies, is we make it in a way where people can understand, but what does that look like in my world? How can I understand it? How can I synergize it? And how do I understand a lot of this is down to judgment once you're making informed choices linked to, that's why I call my work is need-centered, is linked in, well, where's your lighthouse? So it's not about getting success in this next 10 minutes or hour. It may be getting success in 6 months, but what do you need to do now? Now you know what your outcome end state is. And I think that's where, if we can break those barriers down, where somebody that isn't an academic, and I know you and I are not academics, is someone could say, oh, I now know what that means, and I know now how I can add that to what I already do. And could it be now I'm seeing things in a different way? I may change more because now I understand it better.
Yeah, that's definitely true. And it's probably worth mentioning, that from a methodological perspective, we're fairly agnostic. So if somebody is a particular devotee of a particular delivery method, that's fine. That's not necessarily the point of this. The point is, I have my own sort of theoretical and philosophical underpinnings that basically which are central to my practice. But PDS is entirely compatible with that. There's no kind of dilemma, or if there is, then actually that's something we need to unpick and have a conversation about and see whether there is incompatibilities, or whether that actually grafts on or not.
100%. Shall I share our titles that we may change because we're organic, but we're sticking with at the moment for every 2 weeks? Obviously, this one's a bit of a lengthier intro. So we have gone for, and I'm not sure if your technology will be able to screenshot this in, Stuart, or not within this once they record. But we have, the first bit is any element from the news that we're going to discuss, relevant, that's hit social media, that's caused a bit of a disagreement or highlighted an element. An example might be when the England manager of football was asked to leave, and now they're looking for a new recruit as opposed to finding one earlier, those type discussions. Then we're going to go into a members area highlight. So you're going through the journey, Stuart. So this will be great because you're going through with your coach. I am an active coach, and this is a journey I'm going through. So we can discuss certain chapters, something you may not understand, something you're finding difficult, or something you've now committed to. So it's a journey. Then we're going to talk about a performance tip. So we're going to discuss something that's relevant to the elite performance, whether that's in business or sport. And then we're going to have a community tip. So that is more something that is more for grassroots or in a community type situation where we're saying, actually, we haven't got the high performance attitudes, but actually we struggle with engagement, whatever it may be. We can share a tip there. And then the last bit is just what's coming up. So looking forward to what we're going to do or what's coming up in the next few weeks. Within the first element, we're also on that intro. We're going to look at answering the questions that you guys listening may put in. And when we're live, obviously, we can do that dynamically. And actually, some of your questions may impact the performance and the community tips when we plan ahead. So the more feedback you give us, the more we can make this as valuable to you listening or watching as we can. We want to make it real. We want to make it actually there's things you can take away. And when you've finished, it's going to have an impact on your behaviors, either in your thinking, your action, or your exploration. That is success for us.
There you go. That's definitely it. I'm just going to put this onto the ticker so that people can see what our format's going to be. It's going to scroll across the screen in due course. In fact, if I press show, it should come through. There you go. Things we've seen in the news, how this relates to elements of PDS, some top tips related stuff, and then some questions from the audience going forward. Is that a decent summary, or have I oversimplified? Yeah.
Sounds good. We like simple.
Great. Okay. Well, start us off then, Mark. Let's get into the weeds.
So you did share a link with me. Do you want to start with that?
Well, yes. So my first starting point, I suppose, was as I was exploring various different things, there was a link that I saw from an ex-Olympian and speaker called Kath Bishop, and this was on LinkedIn, who had done a post, and it was in response to a post from an organisation that I got to know a little bit when I was at Sport England, actually, called the True Athlete Project. And the True Athlete Project, very much a sort of calling for change in particularly high performance sport, but I think also across sport. And I actually had one of their founders, a guy called Lawrence Casso-Halstead, who was an ex-Olympic fencer, who and had written a book called the True Athlete Project book. And in the book, there was a lot of stuff about talking about a different set of ideals around sport that were different from the traditional ones, which are around, things like hard work and dedication and commitment and sacrifice and these sorts of things. And they were going for something that was much more about flourishing and kind of people exploring. And so they posted this notion of this idea of what does winning well look like. And then Kath Bishop had sort of shared that and was talking about the way that sport was almost undergoing a little bit of a reappraisal and needs to go through a bit of a reappraisal as it begins to explore, how we can work together. And the bit that I was particularly interested in, and obviously relates to our subject matter, is if we talk about this notion of winning well, which might be oxymoronic, but anyway, we can explore that in itself. There's this whole idea, and one of the ideas of sort of working from a values-led perspective, which I think is similar to the needs-led perspective, but we can explore the differences. But one of the things they talk about is the idea of having coaches that are, and I'll quote this, that are aligned and connected to the holistic vision and their role as social change makers. Now, I think that maps on really closely and it resonates very, very strongly with a lot of the ideas, but I think it begs a question. It begs a question of how does one do that? Because one of the things that we know is there is, I think, a lot of cultural problems within the world of coaching and coach education and coach development that don't necessarily connect the dots as far as what does it take to be, to go from just a broad, glib statement to something that's actually practical and real and actually manifests on the ground. This idea that, being aligned and connected to the holistic vision and their role as social change makers. I mean, the very notion of a holistic vision, I am not sure that exists in many contexts. And I would say that your experiences of working across the entire gamut of of sort of environments, elite sport, community sport, schools, business contexts, I would argue that probably, and you can tell me if I'm wrong here, one of the things I imagine you would see is common is that this notion of being aligned and connected to this so-called holistic vision. There isn't a holistic vision, and therefore how can you be aligned and connected to that? And that's actually probably one of the underpinnings. Anyway, so that's kind of our opener, really. It was an interesting thought process. It was something that's, I think, very relevant for the moment in time around, I think, sport itself in particular is going through this cultural reappraisal. What is the purpose of sport? What is the role of sport in society? And rather than thinking, what ways can we get more people doing sport, what we're actually saying is how can we make sport relevant to people and make it mean something for them in their wider lives. And that's just an interesting challenge, I think, for the sports sector. And I think definitely maps on, I know, to a lot of your teachings.
I think the biggest challenge is if I use just that saying, yes, but. So that pretty much covers 99.999% of people that in a room at the beginning of a season or a business organization, when they're going, right, this is who we want to be, they say it, but there's caveats, the but. So in sports, as an example, yes, we're really going to work on developing people, but we still need to win. So as soon as you hear the but we still need to win, that two things jump out at me. One is, well, why do you think they're different? Because we can't guarantee winning unless you're somebody that can buy the best athletes in, etc. And, the stuff that none of us really can do is thinking they're different, thinking that if we don't develop software and hardware in people, in interdependency, unless for some extreme, and maybe a sport I've never worked with, and I've worked with over 30, that actually is so individual you don't even have anyone with you. I mean, everyone's got, from shooting to golf, there are people around you that help you perform. But it's the interdependency of understanding, okay, so it's not about a philosophy. It's not about are we going to do this? It's actually saying, that I call it the lighthouse. But if we're saying as a governing body or an organization, we're saying, right, if we say this is who we are, what success look like? What success look like this year? And what success look like for the next 5-10 years? And once we know what the success looks like, and not just big picture, is what would that look like for the cleaner? What would that look like for the people that cleans the uniforms, the players, the coaches, the managers, the accountant, the treasurer? This is, if we're saying it's behaviors, we can't have contradictions in here. But then are we prepared, once we know what that looks like, to look within ourselves and identify what are my daily behaviors I need within my role? What do they look like? And we put the UAEs against them. What would be unacceptable, acceptable, exceptional? What do I need to be better at or continue to do with any data passed to somebody else above me, left or right or below me? That could be an accountant, a manager, a player, a parent, doesn't matter. So then what I've got to do is say, well, I need to spend time now to understand if I'm passing data. And when I say data, information, interaction, whether that's through an email or voice or product, is what I'm saying is I need to understand, when you receive information from me, is it useful? Do you understand it? And is it fit for purpose? Let me understand so I can empathize your challenges and your needs. And when they do it the other way around, okay, so when I'm receiving information, I want the person that's sending it to ask me the same questions. So now I'm saying, okay, now I recognize who I need to be aligned to that lighthouse. Now I recognize how I need to interact better and the obstacles to break down to anyone I'm interacting with interdependently. It's the same for athletes on a pitch or a court. Once I understand that, we say, okay, so what are the changes we need to make? Now here's where the difficult part happens. We need to prioritize it. So we're not going to change everything straight away, but what is the number one? Once I know the number one, I explicitly impact that as a work on that trumps everything else, barring safety, so long as it's aligned to the lighthouse. And then we share with everyone of influence, this is what I need to change. This is why. This is what it looks like. These are the permissions I'm giving you. So if I'm not, you can say this to me, and I'm giving you permission to do that. And these are the what ifs. So if this happens, you can do this. If this happens, I'm going to let you know here. I know even with our brief interaction of setting this up, we had that agreement where we say, okay, so let's agree to reply to each other in this amount of time. If we say we're going to do something, we commit to it within the date and timeline. If we don't, as soon as we know out of our control, we let the other person know, and then we honor these elements. So until we do that, and then we say, right, how long is it going to take to change? That's a pie in the sky. So we say, let's review in 4 weeks. So each week, I mean, I put loads of adherence frameworks, and we could talk about that word at Stuart, but the frameworks that allow us to commit to what we said we were going to do, and the support around that itself and others. So there's lots of things to allow us to keep it top of our head, but that's a brief level of the level of commitment we need to support change. And we can't compromise and say, hang on, we lost this week. Oh, no, I need to go back to the instruction or to tell you or doing what we need to do, the quick fix. Because the quick fix will just be a barrier to the change we've now agreed we need to make. And they're normally 3-4 year plans, Stuart. They're not normally a season plan. And if you look at the great teams in the world, you can look at Formula One, you look at Premiership football, rugby, hockey, NBA. No one's at the top forever. But what there are is you see this growth of change. I would say look at potentially at Williams F1 in the next 3 years. You watch how they will develop, I believe, based on the personalities they're bringing in and the work they're doing. So what we've got to understand is to stay at the top is very rare. But what we also need to say is generally it takes 3-4 years to build the culture and the behaviors we need within the people we have, and then recruit the right people in and know who that is and how do I assess that, not on an interview, and also have the courage to say, I use that old saying, Stuart, change the coach or change the coach, to say, if I'm doing everything I can once we're agreeing in this organization to change the behaviors I know you need to make, and you're still not deciding to make them, then I'm going to move you on. Either find the right job for you that fits your role, or just say, thanks, but you're not for us. And have the courage to do that. But don't compromise what you've now said, whether we call it philosophy or a way, it doesn't matter. That's a level of due diligence and clarity we need with everyone of influence from the beginning, and that patience to develop and discover, and then the commitment cycle of reviewing every 4 weeks and not changing it because of an outcome. And that's why generally businesses and sports do not make the change they need. And you see in top sports, Stuart, and business, often it's, I'll just fire the coach or the manager and get someone else in. And hopefully that's the answer. And generally it's not. Generally that there's a bit of luck involved if they get a ripple and then it dips again. But generally it's the people who are recruiting, the people of influence at the very top need to understand what we've just discussed here and understand, am I willing to do it? Am I willing to commit to it? Am I willing to share the shareholders, stakeholders? Look, we're looking at a 3-year change plan, but this is what you're likely to see. So there may be a dip in outcome, but these are the performance markers I can share with you in behaviors, in judgment, decision-making that I can review with you every 8 weeks, wherever we agree, so you can see we're on the right path. And that's a snapshot, Stuart, of why those discussions are often not successful in application.
So there's a lot to unpack there. One of the things I was just going to start on, though, is I think the point you make is a really interesting one. It's one that I've talked about a lot before, which is this notion of, they just say fire the coach. I think in elite context that's probably true, which the assumption is that just a change of leadership will magically fix what might be actually sort of systemic cultural problems within the organization's hierarchy. And I've noticed something about elite sport organizations, which is the ones that seem to have sustainable success. And by the way, success is a relative measure, because sometimes you have sports organizations that they, not getting relegated might be success because of the resources that they've got and what have you, or, whatever it might be, or, a particular performance level. So, but interestingly, and I think the ones that have success are the ones that I think have a sort of a philosophical and a cultural framework that's sort of embedded within the organization. And what they tend to do is they'll recruit leaders who map onto that philosophical or that sort of ideological framework, rather than assume that the leader will bring a new way of operating in and magically transform the organization. And by the way, those coaches aren't necessarily like the leaders of the whole organization. What they are, they're talismanic and they have a role to play, but they can't necessarily run the rest of the business. And so that's a major challenge. But lower down, when it comes to sort of like pathways and practitioners, coaches in this case, working in pathways, what I've noticed is almost sort of the opposite, which is organizations, they're quite happy to have, they develop athlete curricula or development frameworks or talent development frameworks or whatever it might be. And they in the best cases, use those talent development frameworks as a mechanism by which to determine whether an individual should enter a talent pathway, progress in a talent pathway, or be essentially removed from the talent pathway, deselected, or not selected into the next round or the next phase or whatever it might be. So they have a very clear expectation on athlete in terms of what's required to be in the system, and they obviously have to make those decisions because they can't have, there's limited space and they can't resource all the athletes that they would want to as much as they'd like to. But when it comes to coaches, there's nothing like the same rigor. So they don't even necessarily ask the coaches to adhere to the talent development pathway and to work within that curriculum framework. To a certain extent, often leave the coaches to their own devices to sort of do whatever it is that they want, which is interesting. They don't necessarily recruit those coaches based on their how well versed they are in that framework and the curricula that they've developed and the sort of culture of that and how what that means from a behavioral standpoint. They don't necessarily create kind of a job description, person specification that you would recruit against that maps against that. And they don't have a clear idea of what the behaviors, skills, knowledge for an individual would be in order to be able to perform these various roles within the talent pathway. And these people have enormous sway over the futures of young individuals who are exploring and progressing within this sort of domain, and can, as a result of that, act in ways which aren't aligned to the organization's goals, and then that creates conflict, difficulty. It can sometimes be quite harmful from an athlete perspective. And so this notion of having this articulation of what a practitioner should act, how they should act, how they should be, how they should go about their work, it doesn't exist. And as a result of that, because it doesn't exist, if there is sometimes a requirement for removal or for a conversation that is difficult because that individual isn't necessarily aligned philosophically with the wider aspirations of the organization, those are avoided. And therefore, those individuals don't necessarily have the kind of change the coach conversations that could exist because of a real lack of clarity of expectation. And so going back to that sort of framing that you're putting there is that one of the things I think about PDS is we just get clear on what's expected, and I think we ask coaches to do this with athletes about being clear of expectation, and we actually ask the athletes to be clear about their own expectations. I'm getting into the thing of it, but we can come back to this. Be clear about what their own expectations for themselves are as a starting point. But we don't really do that with practitioners. It's almost like we're afraid to, because I don't know why, but it tends to be. So we don't seem to be holding coaches and practitioners holding them accountable to standards, even standards they've established for themselves, in the same way we are with athletes. So we deselect athletes very readily, but we don't deselect coaches if those coaches are not acting in accordance with agreed sets of parameters, largely because those parameters don't always exist.
Oh, there's so much to unpick there, and I'm not going to be able to unpick all of it, but going back to the very initially when you started that conversation is, yes, capability is massive, but people need to understand how to measure individual capability and not have pie in the sky false expectations of that results biased. So that's one element, that understanding your outcome will be based on your capability. But do you know the capability within each person, and importantly self? Do you know the source of any breakdown of capability, and then interventions as support to support that change, which is where my action review process helps in business and sport. The other elements that you're talking about there is that element of words to action. So I know it's used often in Formula One within their bosses, but that point of, right, you've said you're going to do it. and I know it's big within PDS, it has been through the beginning, is show me. Don't tell me, show me. And this is a point you made, which is huge, and I see this so often in football academies, in business, at community level, is once we agree we're going to do something, and you're the person who's the influence of those people underneath you or next to you and above, and you've agreed permissions and you've made sure there's clarity there, you've eliminated the grey, which most people do not do, is then you have to follow through if someone is unacceptable based on what they said they were going to do, based on their capability. And this is where it falls down, because as you say, in business and in sport, community, organization, schools, what often happens is people go away and they get caught up in their normal work and they're back to what they normally do.
Yeah.
And then they slip up. Now, sometimes it's just they've forgotten, which is fair because it's new. So you put in interventions that aren't aggressive, but there's an intervention strategy of reflection. And often it's because they've said they're going to do it, but they're so used to not committing to any of these initiatives because there's a new one in 2 weeks that they go, there's no point because you'll just come up with something else in 2 weeks. And what's the next fad fashion? So they don't commit to it because they don't believe in the change. We've done it all before. Oh, we've tried everything. And they've accepted their mediocrity of where they are. And they're not willing to change because they don't believe that it's going to be sustainable. So this is where, when we set this up, we've got to make sure that the people setting up are willing to commit to the ugly of people regressing and be confident to know, how can I manage my state? What intervention have I got to have that conversation, and be confident when we leave the conversation that it's not an ugly walk away. Actually, we've agreed something. They are keeping ownership. I'm not micromanaging them, but we're doing it early enough so it doesn't start to get to a point where it's lost now, and then we have an emotional interaction with them, which again, you're at a loss there. So I think back to the change is we need to know what it looks like. Everyone needs to buy into the value. They don't have to like it, but buy into the value. Put some years around it within self, role, and others. What does that actually look like? And the problem with philosophy often is it's a bit pie in the sky. But what does that look like to us? What does that look like to you and us and our interaction? Agreed permissions, but then the biggest challenge is committing to it. I don't think I would say the most successful of it was easiest for me, I'd say, is Evo Soccer, Stuart, which you've seen their videos. There's plenty in the members area. I'd say they've been the best at committing to change. There's been obstacles, there's sometimes they've regressed a bit, sometimes there's forgot, but actually one check and they're back on it. I'd say most organizations, my biggest challenge is people don't commit to what they say they're going to. And people leave it in the organization, they leave it, and then they wait for me to come in and go, oh, Mark, we've had an issue. And so, well, remind me what we agreed. For you being a manager and a mentor, yeah, but I was a bit uncomfortable. He's a strong personality. She's been here for years. Says, well, if you don't have that intervention, you're now not honoring what you agreed. So now you're the one that's unacceptable. And it's building that confidence to do it, but also it's knowing how to do it, having a framework that makes it easy for you to go, right, I've got a strategy now, and I'm going to do it early, and then I'm going to scan for the change. So if we use that in a sports context of an intervention, imagine on a pitch or a court, and you've just pulled a player over an athlete or a timeout as a group. You've agreed something, or you've told them, whatever it may be, and then you go out again. What often happens is the coach then is looking for the play. They're looking for what's happening next. But what they're not looking for is, hang on, we've just agreed we're going to do this. Let me scan for, are you committing to what we agreed? And not look for other stuff, not get caught up in scanning the rest. And if it's a no, we're looking for, has anyone else spotted it? That's where our rule of three comes in. Is a peer at self, have they regulated? If not, as a peer, no. Now I need to choose an intervention because now we're not committing to what we said. So the intervention, again, using the ARP. So it's this cycle of, we know the high probability is once we agree something as an organizational change, it won't go swimmingly. It will not commit to action. There will be dips. People will forget. People will regress. They will go back. So it's being ready for that and know what interventions are got in place to reduce it. But then what interventions have I got in place so when it does happen, I've got the strategy and I will commit to the strategy relentlessly, patiently for months and years, not for a couple of weeks. And again, we're going back into that point of we're understanding personalities, especially with strong ones. Sometimes people will avoid those conversations, but actually it would be unacceptable to avoid it if it's pre-agreed. If we don't pre-agree it, then it becomes very difficult. But if we pre-agreed it with that person, then it becomes a lot easier. And that's that pre-agreement of clarity we talked about, Stuart.
Yeah, I mean, again, lots to unpick there. And we're touching on some things that we're probably going to get into much more detail about a little bit later on in future conversations, particularly things when we start to talk about interventions like Rule of Three or ARP or various things like that. One other thing I wanted to just unpick with you a little bit was in your sort of opening monologue, you talked about this notion of yes, but. I want to circle back to that because I think that's probably I think you said something like 99% of people say something to you along those lines, yes, but. And that really kind of stuck with me because I think that speaks to this point about a journey of change, like what do we want change? When do we want it? After an appropriate period of reflection and when everything's right in terms of our world. Well, that's the point, isn't it? People are often very, very keen to bring about change, but very, very unwilling to do what it takes to bring the change about. And I'll hold my hand up. I'm as guilty as anybody. In embarking on this journey, you absolutely live the philosophy, and it's an every time philosophy, not a sometime philosophy. And it's, let's establish the kind of rules of engagement, so to speak, from the get-go, and honoring those rules, is hard for somebody like me that has a fairly chaotic, a more chaotic lifestyle than I would like. So in many ways, I can totally resonate with that, and I'm empathetic to it. But I also see the value of making the commitment, so the act of making the commitment is sort of the thing, and then the follow through, and that's the bit that I think is lacking in the vast majority of organizations that you operate within. Is you have strategy, you have all these goals, you have these aspirations, and then there is a real lack of follow through. There's a lack of rigor, there's a lack of discipline that's required in order to follow through on the change process. And so what you get is what you referred to, which is regression. Now, the best thing about this is that we deal with regression, and we deal with it relentlessly in a firm and friendly way. But it doesn't mean we don't deal with it. And that's been the biggest problem, is I think everybody's so kind to each other and prepared to let each other off the hook. And actually, that then becomes the worst thing you can do for somebody else who's on a journey of change. And this is something that you really taught me, and it's actually been hugely beneficial. And again, I'm now reflecting and thinking this is an area I need to get back to. But even in parenting, this idea that with my children, they say, I really want to do this. And you go, or I'm going to do this. Like, can we get a dog? Yes. Okay. Are you going to, make sure that you feed and clean and take for walks and this, that, and the other? Of course I am. Does it happen? No. Whose fault's that? Well, I did not follow through on the statements that the children made about what they said they were going to do. Instead, I took the easy way out and did it myself because it just was.
Now, let's texturize this. So let's stick with I want to get a dog. So what you've said there, let's unpick. So I'm not saying this is you, Stuart, but let's unpick. So, Daddy, I want a dog. I'm not your son, by the way. We're just playing that. And if Daddy says, oh, yes, but you need to feed, walk, and wash it for the money. Oh, yes, I will do that. This is the same as when we first did that decades ago, the PDS coaching course, where you got a goal for going, right, I'm going to practice 5 times a week before I see you. That's the same as that kid going, oh, yeah, I'll walk. So great. So get your diary out then. What do you mean? Well, everyone's got a diary on their phone, kiddo, or you might. Okay, so you need to walk them before school if we're going to do the walk. So what time do you normally get up now to be ready in the car or on the bike walking to school by this time? Great. So therefore, how long does it take to go for a walk with the dog? I'm not sure. Where the dog walks? Oh, I'm not sure. Okay, well, we need to find that out. So let's find it out. If they don't go and find that out, there's no dog. So now they go and find that out. And this is that patience and relentless to come back and go, right, I've got to walk. It's trying to show me Google Maps. Great. So how long will that take? So remember, you've got to get ready first. Lead on the dog, bang, and if it's a new dog, might be pulling, etc. Oh, it's going to take about 45 minutes, Dad. Oh, and picking up the poo. Where's the poo bags going to go? In the bins. Do you know where the poo bins are? Great. So we come back. So it's 45 minutes. Who's feeding the dog? You said you were going to feed the dog. Oh, yeah. So who's paying for that then? Oh, is Daddy paying for that? Okay, great. So if you're doing it, then how long is it going to take to feed? So what's important if they're feeding the dog? Well, I've got to make sure they've emptied the bowl and there's water afterwards. I can't leave and just throw the food down. Okay, so now we're looking at 90 minutes. We've calculated that's 90 minutes more before you go to school. So that means you're getting up at 7 normally. Now that means you need to get up at 5:30 every day, Monday to Friday. So now we're taking the dream and we're making it real. So now you've got a kid that might be going, well, I didn't think when I said, yeah, I'll walk the dog, I didn't realize the level of detail and the timings that's going to impact on my time. Oh, maybe not want a dog that much. So, well, fine. But you let me know. Once we get to a point, you go, right, I'm ready to commit to that. Now, once we get to the window where we've gone through all that and you go, right, now, Dad, I'm ready to commit to. Remind me what you're ready to commit to. They tell us again. Great. What if you don't? What permission are you giving me if you don't do what you said you're going to do? What? Well, I need to support you and I need to honor you, but it would be no good if you do it for the first week and the second week you're going, oh, sorry, I got up late, Dad. Can you do it? Because that's not what we agreed. So if that happens, what permission are you giving me? Where's the impact of that? Okay, well, no PlayStation for Saturday. So that week, if you miss a day for the whole of Saturday, there's no game station, if that's something for them. Oh, okay. So whatever's relevant, obviously, etc. But what we've got to do is before we get to the yes and walk off, it's all about, right, what does that actually look like? What does that mean to you? What changes do you need to make? Well, look at your schedule now. Are you ready to commit to that? For how long? 16, 17 years. If you get in a dog, maybe 20 years. Not just puppy, now they're adult. Dog training, etc., etc. So that little thing where you've got a kid saying, Dad, can I have a dog? You're going to walk them. Oh, yes, Dad. Feed them. Yes, Dad. Can you see the textual difference of raising awareness to, well, let's look at that right now before we get to the agreement of Dad says yes.
Yeah, I mean, 100% that resonates enormously with me. And actually, the reason I started laughing is because obviously so much of that brought to life for me the kinds of conversations that either did or didn't happen or needed to happen. And sometimes actually, by the way, going back to your point about, is there no PlayStation or is there this, that, and the other? What happens if they don't? It's like you said, it's agreeing with them.
Yeah.
What the consequences of not following through are. It doesn't always have to be severe as a consequence as that. It could just be, that they've got to then
wash up.
Or they've got to make up the time somewhere else with a different role or something else that's got to be done. But I'm using dog as an example. Like, I mean, it doesn't have to be as extreme as that. But yeah, I mean that whole idea of anybody who says, I want to make a commitment to something, this notion that you've put there, and actually this is something that I've been you introduced me years ago to the GROW model. I think it's Simon Whitmore created the GROW model, and I've sort of taken it a little bit further and call it the growth model, because I added on.
Do you remember I put an S on the end of GROW? That will be
grows. Yeah, I remember that. You did, yeah. And that was strategy, wasn't it? S.
Yes.
So for those who aren't versed in GROW, goal, reality, options, way forward or will, and then you had strategy. I went for goal, reality, options, way forward, time bound, and who can help you, because I found that people often need to identify who will help them on that journey, and that sort of speaks a little bit to the agreement that you would find with the person who would make that move forward. But with with grow and this notion of reality, that's the biggest thing, the strongest thing, the most powerful element. Is anybody says, I want to do this or I want to achieve that, and that is purely and simply a wish or a dream until you've explored the realities of what it will take to achieve that dream in whatever time frame. And when you go through that reality process with people, they then begin to think about, okay, well, is this a realistic goal? A, do I really want it? B, if I do really want it, maybe I have to reframe my timeframes. Maybe I have to reframe, kind of how it's going to materialize for me. Maybe I'm going to have to reframe the energy that it's going to require, and all those sorts of things. So, and I find so much people's aspirations are just so far removed from their actual reality that even just that process of exploring what that means for them in reality is enormously powerful, because no one's ever done that.
And we're back to that final point you've just mentioned there, Stuart. We've got two options. I'm sure there's variants of the two, but the two options is once someone said, right, I want to achieve this, I want to get here, we get into that detailing. Okay, what's that going to take? For how long? Let's look at the logistics of that. So and often it's not a sacrifice. Often it's, if this is so important to you, what do you need to change? Sometimes it's not sacrificing, not seeing your friends. Go, no, I prefer to do this. But you've got to say, where is it for how long? Now, often the other option that we haven't discussed is that point of, now they're looking at it, says, no, honestly, in reality, now you've pulled me back to reality for all my excitement. Like pre-season teams and businesses, we're going to do this division, right? Reality time. Are you willing to commit to? And then when you say no, so okay, so let's look at resetting the goal. Because if we reset the goal, then, that's achievable. So it might take years later, what we're doing is we're preventing false expectations. And I do this with a lot of coaches. I know this is sliding into something slightly different, but a lot of coaches get caught up in a performance and the result they want to see in a live match, whether that's 5-6-year-olds playing or elite performers. And their expectation is so pie in the sky false, something they've never seen on the pitch in practice under pressure. And also we can't replicate the opposition skills. They just expect it because they've done a few drills, a few games, and they go, and all of a sudden now they're getting annoyed, wound up, and then after the match really frustrated because, well, we didn't win or we didn't perform. And you're saying, well, when have they ever performed at the level of your expectation? So could it be you're setting a bar that the athletes are not ready for yet? And then we're looking at where's the source of the breakdown. Well, let's invest there patiently, relentlessly. So often it's once we get that reality and take not to shut down enthusiasm, but to add realism to commitment, which is the discipline between discipline and motivation, is understanding sometimes we need to adjust the bar. But it's got to be a mutual dialogue. It can't be an autocratic, I'm telling you. This is where the quality of the dialogue comes in.
Yeah. This is a very, very good welcome reminder for many of the principles that have regressed in my own life